You know, sometimes I take a long look in the mirror and ask myself, am I dumber than a politician? Am I stupid for thinking that I can be a mobile engineer or I can pick up Unreal on my crappy PC? Am I wasting my time making videos for strangers on the internet to watch? Am I out of the times for wanting to review 5 games, the newest of which came out almost 2 decades ago? Is it a bad idea to review a collection well over a month after it came out and all the hype has died down? The answer is probably more yes than no. Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 1 might be my most hyped game of the year. Yeah, there may be some shortcomings on the port side, but most of the value of this package comes from the ability to legally play these games on modern hardware.
Legal, yes!
The last real game in the franchise was released in 2015, so I think it's safe to say that these games have skipped over an entire generation of gamers. And with the last year's hype over Metal Gear Rising, I can't think of a better time to reintroduce this legendary series. Boasting 4 games and 1 masterpiece, alongside a slew of collector content, I honestly couldn't have asked for much more. Well, okay, I could have asked for a lot more, but we'll get to that in a second. Disclaimer, I guess, I could go into full video essay mode on all of these games, and I plan to. But our time is limited, so this is mostly going to be a beginner-friendly reviews, avoiding big spoilers, as well as insights into how well these ports were handled, even though I didn't play any of these games on their original hardware. I'll eventually go into full in-depth analysis of these games, but for now, let's just take a look at the collection as a whole, starting with the collection itself. Because, you know, you could have a whole collection of the greatest games of all time, and everyone knows that if it doesn't come with an art book, it's certified garbage. As a collection of games, this is garbage. I can only speak for the PC version, but on PC, this is an absolute chore. So you have to download the original 2 Metal Gears, Metal Gear Solid, Sons of Liberty, Snake Eater, and the bonus content all separately. This makes sense considering you can buy them all separately, in case you really hate MGS2 or something, but it would have been so nice to have a hub menu where you could just access everything. For example, let's try booting up Snake Eater. So you start the program, you wait through some logos and warnings, sign the terms and conditions on your first time, and we're brought to this pretty slick title screen, and it's pretty good. It's stylish, more so than something like 3D All-Stars. We hit start, we have a wide array of options. To start the game, we select game selection, select which version we all play, select our language, and then hit start unless we want to see the online manual, which is very detailed. I like these a lot. But once we hit start, the program closes, and we wait for another one to open. Then we're put into Snake Eater's menus. And you thought Snake Eater's menus were bad before. This also goes for Metal Gear Solid 2. Metal Gear Solid and the original Metal Gears run in program, but Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 you have to wait for another one to open, and this just takes forever. But since I was a big brain gamer and pre-ordered the entire collection, I got a special launcher filled with bonus content. What's in the bonus content? NES gear. These are the worst games in the collection. Metal Gear is a watered-down version of the original, and Snake's Revenge can't decide whether it wants to be Metal Gear or Contra. They've both aged horribly. I don't hate these games in the same way I don't hate playing Ice Climbers. They're novel, but definitely the worst of the package. But hey, at least Snake's Revenge has some good tracks. Speaking of tracks, we got a music player. What is this selection? I know MGS isn't exactly known for its music, but come on. No encounter for any game, no yelling dead cell, not even the theme of Tara? I know the original main theme had some copyright issues, but this is still pathetic. The only songs I'd say are standouts are the 3 pre-order songs, being orchestral covers of Best Is Yet to Come, Can't Say Goodbye to Yesterday, and Snake Eater. As someone who loves VGM orchestral covers, these are pure beauty. You can't play them anywhere else. You must stay on this screen to play music. It doesn't carry over to the main menu, you can't download it to your hard drive. Why? I'd love to listen to these while I'm working, which is doable, but I shouldn't need to resort to piracy for something like this. The last thing is the virtual graphic novels of both MGS 1 and 2. Now, these look radical. I love the aesthetic of the cutscenes of PSC games and what? So, this collection is not complete. You must download the graphic novels and other things like Japanese versions of each game, and it doesn't work. It just brings up the Steam homepage. I'm adding this to my Steam review. Like, holy cow, you butchered literally everything you could about the cosmetics of this collection. I guess I expect nothing left from the geniuses behind Metal Gear Survive. But let's be real, only true intellectuals judge a collection by its bonuses. And you and I are both monkey idiots. We only care about the games included. So how do these hold up?
Metal Gear! What the heck is Metal Gear?
The OG, the game everyone pretends they've played, released on a console everybody pretends they know about. Metal Gear was Hideo Kojima's first outing as a video game director. Inspired by Kojima's love of action movies at the time, he wanted to make a game like such, but was limited by the hardware. So he worked around it and made a stealth game. So rather than running around with a rapid-fire shotgun like in Contra, you're rewarded for staying out of sight. And it was pretty great. For the time. The game feels like the original Metroid, where the most enjoyment you get is from seeing where the series got its roots. Though, I'd say it's better than the original Metroid in that sense. If you're new to this series, I don't think this is a bad place to spot, but if you can fill in the blank, there's really no reason for you to start here. If you can't, spoilers I guess. The CIA unit Foxhound is sent to infiltrate Outer Heaven, intending to destroy the ultimate weapon, Metal Gear. They send in Gray Fox, who gets captured, so they send in a rookie, Solid Snake, to rescue him, supported by his mentor, Big Boss. So the game is mostly about him sneaking around Outer Heaven. If you've played a Metal Gear game before, you'll definitely feel at home, but not nearly as privileged as you once were. There's no crawling, you only have 4 directions of movement, menus are abundant, and you need a separate keycard for every door. And the enemy AI has a lot to be desired. Sight lines are about an inch thick and only work in each direction. But then again, probably the most enjoyment you'll get out of this game is watching the guards look for you and be pathetically bad at it. Sneaking around is so easy, the game respawns down guards in the worst of places to keep things from getting too easy. That and the other bullcrap ways this game keeps you from progressing. It's not NES bad, but it's very aged. Port-wise, I'm not the guy to ask about this. It's the HD collection port, not the original, so dialogue text is very out of place. You save with the MGS 3 screen, etc. Speaking of port stuff, you can adjust the screen position and backgrounds. This is a pretty big feature people talked about prior to the release, making it notably good for streaming. And the backgrounds they chose are great. The same goes for Metal Gear 2. But spending too much time judging that will make us too intellectual, and that's really it for Metal Gear. It's a fine starting point, but don't put off the other games if you're having trouble with this one. This feels like including Mario Bros in the Super Mario Advance games. It's fun, but hardly its own package.
What would Snake do? Kill his dad and die of old age?
Metal Gear 2, Solid Snake on the other hand, almost works as its own game and as the bridge between Metal Gear and Metal Gear Solid. The sequel to the original is incredibly impressive. After Snake killed Big Boss in Outer Heaven, I assumed you knew that already, he retires from the Foxhound unit. But when a doctor goes missing in Zanzibar Land, or something, Snake is brought out of retirement and sent to Zanzibar Land to investigate. If you've played Metal Gear Solid, you'll be surprised at how much the game got its start here. Crawling, evasion phase, bosses with dumb names, several characters including Colonel Campbell, and the Soliton radar, and the radar is surprisingly necessary. You still navigate in screens, but enemies now move real-time off-screen, so if you don't know what's on the next screen, you might get spotted. And while the enemies aren't MGS smart, they have gained an alarming amount of brain cells since Metal Gear. Again, you can still pull off some dumb bullcrap to get around them, but if you go in expecting inch-thick sightlines, prepare to be amazed. As a starting point, I wouldn't discourage it. It may even be a better starting point than Metal Gear. But I think a lot of enjoyment here comes from how the game bridges the gap between Metal Gear and Metal Gear Solid. That's not to say there isn't any enjoyment here to be had. I just can't see a new fan getting as much enjoyment out of this as veterans. Heck, I hardly have any footage of the game because I just didn't grab me like the other games did. Story-wise, okay, Kojima's kind of notorious for trying to fit the MSX games into the new games, and it's become so retconned that it's hardly worth paying attention to. Spoilers, I guess, but there are scenes in almost all Metal Gear games going forward that explain what actually happened here, all trying to adopt them into a new timeline, which is just another way of saying retconned. So working to understand these games is just a waste of time, but that's really the series itself. Coming back to this after playing the rest of the series is a lot more fun and stable than going back to Metal Gear, and I really do recommend you check it out eventually. I just wouldn't say check it out before.
Are you familiar with Big Chungus?
Alright, now we're in the big leagues, the real OG, Metal Gear Solid. I first experienced this game earlier this year via the Twin Snakes through completely legal means. If Metal Gear is Metroid, this is Super Metroid. It takes every concept from the original 2 games and puts it into a 3D space, expanding on them in new hardware, better writing, better gameplay, voice acting, cutscenes, you name it. Solid did it better. Wait, I guess Metroid Prime is a better comparison. This is arguably one of the better places to start with the series, only being held back by a lack of modern controls and still not aging fantastically. Don't get me wrong, everything still works here. But I just feel the other 2 Solid games aged better than one. That's for a couple reasons we'll jump into in a minute. But the story, it's pretty notorious, so much so that Starbomb made a song about it. In the distant future of 2005, I was live then. Solid Snake is brought out of retirement once again, as his former unit, Foxhound, have gone rogue and taken over Shadow Moses Island in Alaska and taken control of Metal Gear. Now threatening to launch a nuke at DC, Foxhound is demanding the remains of Big Sauce, the remains of Big Boss, and a whole lot of money. So Snake must infiltrate the island, rescue some guys, stop the terrorists, and most difficult of all, stop the Metal Gear. Pretty simple premise. But we come to meet a colorful cast of characters along the way, learning some dirty little secrets, and discover what the point of war is. Or something. This game arguably has some things going against it. The game pretty much hasn't been touched since the PS1, which may be a good thing for some, but keep in mind that this game was playable on this, which means we only have 8 directions of movement and Snake only has 1 speed. Stalking is impossible, and aiming is just, oh, so fun. I don't blame them. I get wanting to preserve the original, but I'm allowed to not like this. There are a handful of mechanics that I think people say were series staples, but weren't actually introduced until MGS2. Like non-lethal weapons, aiming, dodge rolling, shootouts, caution phase, etc. So playing this version after playing the Twin Snakes just makes me feel robbed of such. And I was actually surprised at how different the Twin Snakes is from this version, but that's irrelevant. This is much more of a me thing than the game's own fault though. I say this because despite it, Metal Gear Solid is still amazing. It has super tight stealth action, great bosses and puzzles, and very unique and diverse environments alongside fantastic presentation I mentioned earlier. Speaking of bosses and puzzles though, there is one of each in particular that hasn't aged all too well. So much so that to progress, you need to go into the game's overlay menu. If you've played the game, you know which ones I'm talking about. Graphics wise, I've never played the original PS1 version, so I can't really say how good the game looks in comparison, but I did see a bunch of flickering textures and odd shapes, but I can't really tell if that's support being bad or just part of the PS1 experience. But from what I've heard, the graphical quality has been much, much better elsewhere, and the outcry from everybody who hates anything less than 120 FPS has been hard to ignore. Speaking of ports, the collection also comes with both Integral, the Japanese enhancement, and 300 VR missions. If you want to take them all down, Godspeed, brother. Alongside the previously mentioned screens and backgrounds, that's MGS1. Despite its rust, it's still one of the greatest stealth games of all time. One of the greatest games of all time, honestly. And I can see why it was part of so many childhoods. Surprisingly, it completely revolutionized what a video game could be with what was once next-gen writing, gameplay, and of course, shattering the fourth wall. I'm not going to pretend that this is the best way to play this game. In fact, I think I do still prefer the Twin Snakes. And I'm not going to pretend like Konami did this game justice, or that this revived somebody's childhood. But I cannot deny that this game is still amazing. All these decades later, I am incredibly jealous of all the kids who grew up playing this game. And may we one day see a true remake. Or, you know, a movie starring Oscar Isaac. Good luck doing this on the theater, though.
You don't appear to have any moments. Be gay and do crime.
Snake, you're aware I have a girlfriend, right?
That doesn't mean anything.
Oh, geez, where do you start with Sons of Liberty? What is or isn't considered a spoiler with MGS2 nowadays? It's an over 20-year-old game. Is it a spoiler now to say you don't even play as Snake for the majority? Because let me tell you, it was once upon a time. Nowadays, I think the game has gotten a pretty notorious reputation for pulling off the borderline false advertising with its protagonists. And the initial response was pretty similar to the whole Last of Us Part 2 bait and switch. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Or am I? This game is hard to talk about. I feel like I'm dancing around every hole of discussion trying to find a good starting point. Don't start here. The game heavily relies on your understanding of MGS1 to understand a good portion of the plot. So if you start here, you're just going to be confused. Who am I kidding? You're going to be confused no matter what. But for the best experience, it's best you play through MGS1 in its entirety before switching to 2. And in comparison to 1, MGS2 kind of flips my feelings on that game on its head. As I said before, a lot of series staples were introduced here. First-person aiming, hiding bodies, 360 movement, etc. It makes the game feel much faster, looser, and you feel even cooler pulling off sweet stealth evasions. But the environment, level design, and overall flow of the game, MGS1's biggest strengths, take an absolute cliff dive in quality. Outside of the tanker, every area looks the same and ugly. The game consists of more chores than anything, and the Kodak tolls will make you late for work. So, you have some of the best feeling gameplay in the series tucked inside a giant orange hexagon with a vampire. And about that protagonist, you play as Beta Metal Gear Rising's Raiden. I don't hate this game because you play as him. If you think that this game would be 10 times better if you played as Snake the whole time, I'm gonna take a bet and say that you'd probably think Rise of Skywalker would be a good movie if we focused on Poe Dameron the whole time. But while there's nothing wrong with a boring protagonist, Raiden is pretty whiny, and I'd be lying to you if I said I didn't wish I was playing as Snake. Another reason you shouldn't start with this game is this is by far the most Kojima game in the franchise. I say this because in later games, 4 and 5 in particular, you can just smell the corporate interference. But here, Kojima was completely free with all of his stupid ideas. Well, almost. So for some, that's a plus. Watching a guy get to have so much freedom with what he designs is fun. Nobody likes a game where you can tell the designer had no interest in it. But for others, this means sitting through half an hour long codec calls and listening to a girl desire death like it's a high school poetry club. And this is also where Kojima's brand starts to show itself. It was a little bit present in MGS1, but things like Otacon's backstory and the interrogation scene and that, a lot of things that Kojima thinks are cool, and spoilers I guess, the game knows this. There are explanations as to why virtually everything except for the gameplay is worse than MGS1. The writers know it's bad, just like in She-Hulk. That makes it good, right? No. But the narrative as a whole, I personally think is impressive, especially for 2001. The game predicted a lot, and has some of the best moments in any of the Metal Gear games. But getting to those points requires a lot of swimming through crude oil water, literally. It's a game that was really more fun to watch people talk about online than actually play the game. And that's really, really rough. I do think that it's worth playing this game at least once, and the Master Collection fixes a lot of the issues the original HD release had. But be prepared. This is less so a game and more of an experience. And I mean that in the worst possible way. You walk out of this game a changed man, or woman, I don't discriminate. Whether that be awakened to the horrors of the new age, or broken down by all the crap this game throws your way. This game is incredible in all the worst ways, kind of like that other game. But I think we've waited long enough. Let's talk about...
I'm defecting to the Soviet Union.
You mean the forces of cringe?
Those are relative terms, you imbecile.
A while ago, somebody asked me what my favorite game of all time was. I said Snake Eater, though I wasn't sure if that was true. I just said it because I couldn't think of any other game I'd rather play at that moment than Snake Eater. And now, playing through it again, man, I'm looking at it and thinking, this is real. This is a game that exists. And I'm just not even believing myself. While getting footage for this video, I had to force myself to play the other games, because every time I sat on my computer, I just wanted to play Snake Eater. It's a masterclass in video game writing, detail, and game design. It's nothing short of a masterpiece and one of the greatest games of all time. Snake Eater starts in 1964 with Snake halo jumping into the jungles of the Soviet Union. It's the height of the Cold War, and tension across the Iron Curtain has never been higher. Your mission, this virtuous mission, is to rescue a Soviet scientist named Sokolov and bring him to the States. You sneak through the jungles, avoiding crocodiles, snakes, soldiers, and you find Sokolov, find Ocelot, kill Ocelot, realize you can't do that, and go find Sokolov again. And the story really starts. Snake's mentor, the boss, reveals that she's defecting to the Soviet Union, taking Sokolov and taking you. Oh. Then the GRU commander, Colonel Volgin, nukes the research lab with an American missile. This draws the attention of Khrushchev, who threatens nuclear war if the US can't prove it had nothing to do with it. So now, Snake is sent back to the jungles and commences Operation Snake Eater, where you must kill Volgin, destroy the Metal Gear, kind of, and most difficult of all, kill the boss. Metal Gear Solid 3's story hits the sweet spot between being too simple and too complicated. There is lore galore, but most of it is optional, and the cutscenes are shorter, fewer, and less convoluted than they were in MGS2. Due to being a prequel that requires no additional knowledge of the rest of the series, Snake Eater is debatably the best place to start for the franchise for newcomers. The only reason I can think of that you wouldn't start with 3 is the fact that no other game in the franchise is going to reach its height, which is the best worst thing ever. The gameplay is by far the most modern of this collection. For the most part, it's the same as Sons of Liberty, but now we have a closer to the ground third-person camera, with the option for overhand if you really want to. But what blew this game out of the water was the addition of CQC, Close Quarters Combat. Before, Snake had some melee attacks that honestly felt kind of cruddy, but now Snake can throw people, choke them, interrogate them. It's radical. You actively feel encouraged to take down enemies with melee for sheer satisfaction alone. This was the thing I was actually most scared of regarding this collection. Originally, Snake Eater used the DualShock 2 and 3's pressure-sensitive buttons to control CQC, We don't really have those anymore, and I was worried the geniuses at Konami were just going to straight port the game, leaving half the combat system inaccessible. Thankfully, this has been addressed, and CQC combos have been remapped. There isn't a very good tutorial in-game on how to perform such, just these videos in the menus and the online manual, and that does kind of suck, but trust me, these are definitely worth studying, because once you master CQC, the gameplay reaches its peak. Alongside that, Snake has a slew of camouflages, animals that he can catch and eat, and a whole medical system. A good portion of the game is dedicated to keeping Snake fed, healthy, and out of sight, but sadly, these are all in the menus, which ruin the pace of literally everything. But that's basically the only problem with this, other than its fantastic gameplay. But as we discovered in MGS2, where you use this gameplay can mean everything. And thankfully, the environment here is pretty incomparable to any other in this collection. It spans between industrial bases, jungles, and mountains. And all in all, you're stranded in the wilderness with nothing to your name. Well, that's not entirely true. You get a tranquilizer gun for most of the time. But everything else, you are left to your own devices. Every area feels like a puzzle on what the most effective way to get around the guards is. This is best shown in the areas where you're left unarmed. As fun as CQC is, you can't just run around with it willy-nilly. You have to be methodical. Make sure you sneak up on a guy rather than gorilla dash at him. And the enemy AIs here are by far the best in the collection. Due to you having a few tricks up your sleeve when it comes to concealment, enemies have larger sight cones, and if they spot you, they will be on alert for a while. Much longer than MGS2. Sure, you could just wait it out, but I'm already late for work, and I'd much rather experience the thrill of narrowly dodging a cleaning squad on my way to my next objective. And you also don't get a radar, at least not one that counts. So it's up to you to keep track of where enemies are, and with closer camera, it makes it so much more coherent than the times where you didn't have a radar in MGS2. All of this combines into the best linear stealth game ever made. One of the best games ever made, and my personal favorite game of all time. Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater is a masterpiece. It will forever be a masterpiece. And I only await Delta with the most positive of expectations. If you take anything away from this video, may it be that Metal Gear Solid 3 is a must-play for gamers everywhere. Man, that started out rough. This collection itself and the 4 retro games made it hard to recommend the whole package to anyone. As far as fan service goes, it fails on almost every level. It takes forever to load, files are missing, the music player is just bad, and NES gear is a novelty at best and a bad memory at worst. But when we look at this collection as nothing more than a re-release of 3 solid games, none of that matters. Metal Gear Solid is one of the greatest video games of all time. Despite not having aged the best, the environments, character, and gameplay shattered the earth. Metal Gear Solid 2 demonstrates what a video game can mean. If you can get past the weaker environments and
I've got Emma Emmerich here. We've managed to avoid drowning.
The story and themes explored in this mind scramble of a game will really stick with you. Metal Gear Solid 3 is a masterpiece. The fact that this game exists is mind-boggling to me. The idea that a team, led by a guy who thinks vamp means gay or whatever, sat down and made this, it's just hard for me to believe. When we see this collection and these games and nothing more, that shows its true value. The Metal Gear series is worth its weight in gold to me. It showed me what a video game could be. Not filled to the brim with hundreds of hours of gameplay, not set in a sprawling open world with new side quests at every corner, not a masterclass in tight gameplay that makes you feel unstoppable and free, but daring. Daring to be unique. Daring to take the tools it has and think outside of the box. Daring to creatively mess with the player in the most memorable ways. Daring to be Kojima. I hope one day I can reach such a pedestal. And I hope to one day to go into these games in greater detail. Because I've been talking about these games for over 20 minutes now, and I've barely scratched the surface. There are also some other aspects of these games I do want to make videos on. While writing the script, I actually started working on ranking every villain in the series, which may come sooner or later, we'll see. But for now, the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 1 is awful. Metal Gear Solid 2, and Metal Gear Solid 3 are all some of the greatest games of all time. I really cannot recommend them enough. Yeah, it may take a certain taste to appreciate them, but if you have that special breed of tongue, this tastes like a flavor explosion.